At the beginning of my career, I actually worked with César quite a bit. I'm Mark Rosenbaum. I'm with the ACLU of Southern California, Chief Counsel. The ACLU had a farm workers project. We had a full-time lawyer on board. We worked closely with the UFW on a number of campaigns. And I twice represented César. I represented him in a case when the Teamsters came into Southern California, and as part of a conspiracy with the growers, sought to strip the UFW of its representation rights of farm workers. And I went down to Indio and argued the case on behalf of the farm workers. We were successful. We also represented the farm workers in cases on behalf of workers who were murdered by growers, and also in a United States Supreme Court case where growers challenged the constitutionality of the Arizona Farm Workers Act, and we filed an amicus brief at César's request. And for all those cases, I was fortunate that I had an opportunity to meet with and work with farm workers, and I worked very closely with César, who really called the shots in terms of helping to develop the strategies that were utilized. I think César would be aghast at the plight of farm workers today, and more significantly at the indifference to what their plight is. We not only don't sit down and eat with farm workers, we choose not to know them. Farm workers make, in California, for example, maybe around $11,000 a year. Their average hourly is less than minimum wage, less than $8 an hour, around $5.40. Farm workers are making between a third and a half of what the lowest paid manufacturer workers are. And really one of the messages of César was that the most important thing we could do as an individual was empathize with others. César used to say, eat with others, and you learn what other individuals' lives are like. We used to sit down. He'd have a great feast, but it was, just humble food without great seasonings, and except he did like really spicy stuff, ridiculous spicy chilies. But that, at the end of every meeting, you would celebrate and the way you'd do it is that you'd have a meeting, and César and the farm workers would sit in an inner circle, and the lawyers would sit outside. And it was a recognition that the decision had to come not from just César, but from the farm workers themselves. And it was only after that those discussions took place and that the objectives were set and the strategies that he would then say to the lawyers, he says, now, how can you help make that happen? He didn't ask the lawyers for what the objectives of the movement should be. He would then say, okay, you heard what the people want. Now what can you do to make that happen? And it was unacceptable to say, well, the law won't do that. He didn't want to hear that. And he was right not to hear that. And he would not take it can't be done as a response. But the lawyers had a role rather than the lawyers be at the center. And I remember I went into this little Indio courtroom. And when I argued, I went into the belly of the courtroom. So I was surrounded by the farm workers. And César had asked me and the other lawyers, and he had been part of explaining what the case was. But I actually argued from within the farm worker community. And that was what César taught. And we argued for a while. The judge asked a few questions. And then he ultimately dissolved the injunction, and farm workers were free to organize again. But that was quintessential César, being completely honest about what the case was, not bearing the case in legalisms, not being afraid to confront the oppressor, and making certain that the words came from the farm worker community. And that was true of everything César did. He was a very modest man, and not modest in an effective way at all. He would, he'd wear a short sleeve shirt and just a pair of workers' trousers. That wasn't a costume. That's who he was. And he insisted that when we had the planning meetings, he didn't come to our offices. He certainly didn't come to the law firm offices, but we went up to Delano, where the farm workers community was, and meetings were intense on hard-baked ground that wasn't far from the sorts of fields where the workers worked each day. And like I said, there was nothing staged about it. What you saw was what you got from César and from the community, and his message was that any farm worker, any of us could be the leaders, and that the message was to really come from the heartland.
Union made is what I tell people. My name is Camila Chavez. I'm the executive director of Dolores Huerta Foundation, and we're based in Bakersfield, California. I grew up in the farm workers movement and was actually raised in La Paz, which is the National Chavez Center now. And, our weekends were really, rallies, marches. I mean, it's just in our blood. And when I was a teenager, that came a point where, I knew I needed to experience something else and went to college. And before deciding that I actually wanted to return to the Central Valley to work with my mom, Dolores Huerta, and really learn as much as I can from her. What an honor, right, to be her daughter and to be able to work with her, a woman who has international recognition for the work that she's done. The legacy that my mother, Dolores Huerta, continues to live is that of a woman who is totally committed to la causa. When people see despair, she sees organizing opportunities. Many people will be upset, oh gosh, this awful bill passed or this proposition, and she says, let's organize. One thing that Dolores Huerta doesn't get enough recognition is that she was so instrumental in passage of the amnesty bill in 1985, which legalized over 1.5 million farm workers. And, as a young child, I didn't see my mom. I'm the youngest of 11, I didn't see our mother that whole time, but this was something that was so important. In all the work that we do, and I say we as in, activist, progressive communities, throughout California and this country, we are building on the foundation that not just, César Chávez and Dolores Huerta and the farm workers movement built, but all civil rights leaders and our martyrs who gave their lives, to make it easier for us, and the work that we do, and all the lessons that we've been able to learn from them as we move forward in our work. Many organizations and activists, identify, with one movement or, and we can't continue that way. We can't continue to work in silos. We are whole beings, and the communities that we work with, the issues I mentioned, one family has, experiencing all of this at the same time, and so we, have to come together and support each other and make sure that we stand strong so that, we can't be defeated, right, by our opposition. And it's, something that the farm workers movement learned early on. As you may know, the César Chávez movie. And it actually talks about the strike and how it was the Filipino workers who went on strike first in Delano, California in 1965, and that the farm workers, César and Dolores had been organizing, mostly Mexican workers, and that they combined their efforts and became one union. So we know that even across, ethnicities, cultural and, cultural barriers, that currently exist, that we have to overcome those. And then, with environmental issues, it was the Farm Workers Union, César Chávez's fast, that brought national attention to the pesticides issues, and not only how pesticides were affecting the workers and children that they were giving birth to, but those of us living here in these communities, right? How pesticides affected residents of the Central Valley, and then how they also affect consumers. So in all of our work, there's a lot of intersections. And I would say one thing that a lot of people don't know is that he was a vegan in the 80s when, a lot of people did not even know what that term meant. And I think that was really cool because not only was he a vegan, but he also taught others about our food and where it was coming from. He would show videos and converted many people to become vegetarians. We would have community meals and dinners, and there was always a vegetarian option. He's the one who introduced tofu to so many people. And so I think that that's something that's really cool that people should know about because, there is a lot of talk. We know that, was it last year in California's elections, or was it 2012, that there was a GMO proposition, right, to get our foods labeled, and unfortunately it did not pass. It was not successful. But I think there's still so much education to do around, our food, where it comes from, and how it affects our bodies. That food is medicine, and that's something that César, taught many people, including myself, from a very young age. I myself became a vegetarian when I was 17 years old in his honor. When he passed, I decided to become a vegetarian, and so that was just one of the many ways that he changed people's lives.